we made our way through the great bulk of this first chapter on marriage. Let me see. The title of that chapter was God's Astonishing Design for Marriage, and we came across a number of interesting concepts. Adam was designed incomplete. He needed a helper suitable to him. God provided that for him and his wife. She is different from him, and that creates a challenge for us. There is a wonder about our wives, or about how God has made them. There's a mystery to them as well, in that they think differently, they respond to things differently, and we need to be very mindful of that and take time to learn them, understand them. I think Chuck had some really good things to say last time about focusing on what your wife is telling you, listening to it intently so that you can respond to that in a meaningful way, and not kind of waste time by going through the same thing over and over and over again because you didn't understand what she was saying, you weren't paying sufficient attention, and then she had to come back and ask you again the second time with a little bit of aggravation, perhaps, as to why something didn't get done. Then we talked about the nature of love, different aspects to love, focusing on the fact that love, especially of the husband for the wife, is that agape love, which is self-sacrificing, putting aside one's own interests for the sake of your wife and making sure that her needs are met. I thought it was an interesting comment that he made about the phileo types of love, the friendship type of love, where the response is, this is what you do for me, and this is why I love you, because you meet my needs in so many different ways. And so we love our wives for that reason, but agape is the opposite. It's like what I do for you and how I help you. And so the one's kind of more of a selfish kind of love, how you're helping me and making me feel. And that's all well and good, but you also have to help your wife too. So that leads us to where we're at now, I think. The last section of this particular chapter, and then hopefully we'll get into the next chapter today. That's on the curse of marriage, the curse on marriage, not the curse of marriage. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of the book, doesn't it? Marriage is a curse. Get out of it while you can. The end, right? All done. Let's go home. Oh, we are home. Okay. So let's pick up our reading then and make our way through this. What then is a man to do with the woman God has given him? The answer concludes the teaching of Genesis 2 on how a man is to love his wife. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. In these verses, God calls man to take specific steps in the relationship as its leader. His wife, as his helper, is called to do the same, but God presents this directive to the man. He must hold fast to his wife. Older Bible versions render this as cleave, which reminds us of sticking things together with glue. That is a good picture of what God intends between husband and wife. He wants us to bond to one another. So here is that idea of holding on to your wife, incorporating her into your life. The NIV translates it as being united to your wife, and I think that helps to round out the idea. It's really to draw this person close to you and make sure that everything in regards to their life is a focus of yours and a concern for you. So then you interweave your lives, that you interact with each other, think through each other's lives, and go through life together. he continues, but bonding changes us. It requires us to give things up, to live differently than we did previously. Exactly. God did not make man to live for himself. God did not put Adam in the garden to be infatuated with his tools and his toys and his self-centered lifestyle. He put Adam there to work and keep, cultivating, nurturing, and protecting that which God had entrusted to him. And the first step for many of us in becoming the men God wants us to be is to become married, so that we will leave behind our selfish ways and begin fulfilling our masculine calling through our relationship with our wives. This is for our good, as any man in a godly marriage can tell you. It is great to have a helper designed by God to love and minister to me, but it is especially good to have to rise up in masculine virtue and strength for the sake of my wife, leaving behind a self-focus that was at best only intended for a temporary season of singleness. So he notes the way that marriage works on us, and as we interrelate with our wives, think through decision-making together, plan out our lives that incorporates both husband and wife together in ways that are fulfilling for both, we begin to see that our interests really begin to adjust and somewhat change as we gain new interests, those of our wives, and perhaps the wives gain more interest with their husbands to a certain extent, and we work together, forming a new partnership, a new direction in life. And Dr. Phillips emphasizes the important role that men have in this whole process of leading the process along, not just kind of grudgingly going along with it, but leading and developing this marriage relationship. And that includes taking advantage of those unique ways in which God has made you to be the man in the relationship. Your strength and self-sacrifice are things which you bring to that relationship, which add meaning and help to the wife. Remember what Peter said about women being, if I can remember the exact wording, probably can't, but the weaker vessel, I think, is the language that Peter uses to describe women, not because they're unequal to us in their humanity or being in the image of God, but there's a greater fragility with regard to the women, it seems to me, in terms of their emotional makeup and other and physical characteristics as well. We're very much aware of that in the debate now about what do you call it, the transgender movement, and having these transgender athletes competing with women. And of course, it's a male body that's competing in a race with the women, and the male body is composed differently. It's faster, it's stronger, it's better equipped for most physical activities. And so this is a destructive development in women's sports and all kinds of aspects to things, but that gets into a whole other area of discussion. But you see here, God has given to men certain characteristics which are of benefit to the wife. She needs these characteristics, and you need to be able to provide them as you are able to. So masculine virtue and strength, the male virtues also need to be on display. Self-sacrifice, being able to make decisions, giving direction, at times confronting. These are things which women need and look for in their men. Not that I know. Being a bachelor, I'm just observing. So, continuing from Genesis 2, we learned that an accurate view of marriage begins with recognizing God's intentions for men in marriage. We are called to find our satisfaction in working and keeping, most often having married and bonded to a woman God has given us as a suitable helper. And because God is good, He has made woman so that she finds much of her own fulfillment in being that helper. I think perhaps some of you men can appreciate that, at least, that your wife probably has a good deal of satisfaction at working alongside of you. I remember Mark Twain writing about Adam and Eve in the garden. And Mark Twain, in his own unique way, uses a good deal of comedy to elucidate that first experience where the man wants to be out in the woods and Eve, his wife, is always around him. He wants to get away from her, and she's constantly there talking to him. It's a hilarious depiction of, it's like the Huckleberry Finn of Adam and Eve. Huck Finn out in the woods and out in the wild wanted to be like that, and there's Eve always next to him, and it bothers him. So I think women want to be with their men where appropriate as much as possible, and they want to be able to contribute to your well-being and happiness, and that can happen in a wide variety of ways, but that's important for them, and we should look for that and appreciate that. Okay, continuing, as we saw earlier in this book, the chief good God intends for all his sons is that they should bear his image in spiritual strength and maturity. For the vast majority of men, this is impossible to do outside marriage with the fullness God intends. This is why it was not good for Adam to be alone. As the chief end of a man's life is to glorify God and enjoy knowing him forever, the chief end of marriage is that a man and a woman should know and glorify God together through their lives, and most particularly through their godly love for one another. I think, again, this is a general statement about men and their well-being. The ordinary design is for us to be married and to benefit from the companionship that a wife provides, and that day-by-day interaction tends to soften the edges, sharpen the focus, correct habits and behaviors that can help the man become more productive, more fruitful in his work and his labor, and that's how the wife helps the husband. Without that partner in life giving her views on what's happening, the man's life, I think, is a little bit not quite what it can be in its fullness. The old saying is 2 eyes are better than one, and so that's kind of the idea here. Now, I mean, the Apostle Paul was a single and he served God unselfishly. So being single is not to be equated with being selfish. I think that would be one thing that I would suggest. And so Jesus himself, in terms of earthly relationships, was single. So there's that. But the point being that God has designed marriage for us. That's the ordinary way in which God works in our lives to sanctify us, and we ought to look for and value godly Christian women as our wives. Okay, I'll just pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions or comments about that much of the chapter, and we can go on to the next if and when you're ready. We were talking about the transgender movement and how it seems to be gathering steam and having such influence in our culture today. A number of years ago, I read a book by Jonah Goldberg called Liberal Fascism. I don't know if you can see that. But the title is Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left from Mussolini to the Politics of Change. And this brought you up to about the time of Hillary Clinton. But one of the ideas in the book that I found was intriguing was that for the American left, you have a messianic figure who is the political leader at any particular point in time. And that one is looked upon as the Christ. And so as you have these various political leaders or social leaders, it's kind of the movement of the culture following this Christ. Kind of a pagan pantheistic idea of one person being elevated in a point of time. And you remember when Obama was president, you had school children singing his praises like he was a god or something like that. And what you bring this around to more cultural issues. You have years ago the celebration of the black man, which you still have today, but almost as though the black man is the savior of the world, and everything revolves now around equal rights for the black man, and really to an extent elevating the black man over everybody else. And then you have the feminist movement as well going into that, but gay rights. Suddenly the search for justice for the black is kind of eclipsed by the gay movement and gay rights, and that being the cause célèbre of the moment, where everything focused on gay people being recognized and allowing them to marry. Now the movement is towards this transgender idea, which is another step beyond that. And in this particular case, it seems to me you have an ultimate rebellion against God and the way that He made you. The gay movement is very much like that. I'll rebel against the plan that God has for me to marry a woman. Instead, I'll marry another man, and I'll assert my own freedom and self-identity in that way. Rebellion against God by doing that. But the transgender is going against the very structure of his or her body, and saying, I will not be confined to the physical body that God gave to me. I'll be whatever I want to be. It's kind of the ultimate narcissism and the ultimate existentialism. It's whatever I want is paramount. And if I want to be a man, I'll be a man. If I want to be a woman, I'll be a woman. I can do whatever I want. And it's a fundamental rebellion against God and His law word that structures all things. And so if God makes you into a man, you can ultimately rebel against God by saying, I don't want to be a man. Even this very basic aspect of life, my gender, is rejected to my own harm, really, but that's the direction things are going. And then Peter Jones, we studied some time ago, talked about how this all is leading to androgyny, where there is no sex. We're all just individuals without any sexual component, and so male, female, all those distinctions disappear, and we're all one. We're all one, and that's kind of the movement of history towards that. And it's all part of this all is one idea, pantheism, identification of the divine with this world, and all things becoming one world religion, one humanity, globalism, so the destruction of nation states, which we see happening here, and opening up of everything, the lawlessness really at work, it's all very much a part of this. And it reminds me of the statement, I'm not sure that I can pull it up real quickly, but God giving them people over to a lie and being deceived. Maybe it's in Thessalonians, I thought it was in Titus. Well, there's that. Yeah, there's another text that I had in mind, but for another day, I guess. But, yeah, it just strikes me that our culture is so deceived and deluded, and you see Satan very much at work in this, and it's just, you are reminded once more of the fact, as Paul said, our warfare is spiritual, and there are spiritual powers and forces at work. I mean, you sit down with somebody and you would think it's very obvious that a man is designed for a woman and not for another man, or a woman for a woman. That's pretty obvious. It's obvious that I'm constructed as a man and I shouldn't try to become a woman in some ways. I mean, these things are obvious. And the left so much talks about trusting the science. Well, the science is pretty clear. men and women belong together because that's a design for the purpose of procreation, of producing a child, and a homosexual relationship obviously cannot fulfill that purpose. They're not designed for that. I don't want to be too direct, but it's obvious that the male is not designed for the male in the way they relate to each other. And so, it's just, there's such a deception at work across our culture. And it's not a matter of intellect. It's a moral issue, a spiritual issue, and it just reminds me that people are enslaved to sin. As Rick, I think, was mentioning a moment ago, they're sinners and they don't accept that, they don't understand that, and so they're deluded into all these fanciful ideas, and it just leads them into being such fools in the way that they live their lives. I had a conversation with a former seminary professor. In fact, he was my professor at Westminster. I was one of his students under his care. In any case, he's an evangelical for Biden, and so he's talking about what took place on January the 6th, and he says, it is Trump with all of his Proud Boy supporters going after the Capitol. And the vast majority of those people are just honest, ordinary citizens who have no idea about Proud Boys or anything like what they're about. They're just there because they support Donald Trump and a good election, a clean election, And there might have been some Proud Boys there, but to broad brush all of Trump supporters as Proud Boys, whatever they are, is just evil. But that's what they do. They latch onto one little thing, blow it all out of proportion, tarnish everybody with that kind of thing. And